There is a fundamental optimism to everything I do on this YouTube channel, everything I've ever written and published on the internet. That optimism, nihilistically enough, is based on the observation that while human nature doesn't change, while all of us in some ways are the victims of a kind of fixed character that's innate and born with us, a set of desires we wrestle with but can never overcome. Despite the fact that on some level, I am still just a caveman. That all of us are the products of these centuries of evolution that are indifferent to our more refined, civilized concerns. That in some ways we're cavemen who can never fit into the expectations of a 21st century sophisticated urban society, that we can never live up to our own philosophical ideals, political ideals, religious ideals. Yeah, but, nevertheless, I have still this fundamentally optimistic observation that stupid people become intelligent. That utterly immoral people become highly ethical. That kind of individual personal change is possible, inevitable even. And when you scale it up, social change, whether it's a cluster of people of a few dozen, a community of people or a few hundred, or societies of millions, that kind of change is possible. That kind of change is in some ways inevitable too. There is this fundamental optimism. Everything on this YouTube channel, everything I do too. We praise optimism as a virtue, right? But we never want to be too particular. Optimism about what? The Judeo-Christian tradition emphasizes human innocence, human purity, a supposedly innate, inborn goodness that I don't believe in. I reject utterly. Okay? My optimism is instead about our ability to learn from our own evil, our own mistakes, our own misconceptions, by being honest about our stupidity, by being honest about our desires, by being honest about the ways in which the stupid, selfish pursuit of those desires has resulted in disaster. In this way, stupid people become smart. Ignorant people become sophisticated, and utterly immoral people become highly ethical. That's the process I see going on around me all the time. Whether people desire it or not, whether people are looking for that change or not, right? You're gonna change, you're gonna learn, But the crucial requirement is honesty. How do we develop? How do idiots become wise? How do we cease to be, the victims of these, the sort of passive victims of these desires that rule over us, to instead become a kind of fundamentally heroic character in control of our desires, making use of those desires to achieve positive ends in the pursuit of ambitions that we might consider somewhat noble or worthwhile. How do you make that change? Not through concealment, right? Not through deception, not through self-deception. It always and inevitably has to come about through a certain fundamental kind of honesty. Now, for many of you in the audience, the hardest thing to be honest about was the religion of your parents or the religion of your grandparents. For a lot of you, that's the hardest thing. For some of you, maybe the hardest thing to be honest about was your own sexuality. I've known gay men, I've known homosexual men for whom it was really hard to admit to themselves they were homosexual. Obviously, for some people it's easy, but for some people it's a huge, huge major conflict they struggle with. The beginning of wisdom with religion, to face up to the fact, to reflect on and really understand the extent to which everything your grandparents conditioned you to regard as wise and noble and so on, that it's utter foolishness, that it's actually quite destructive and evil, that it's killed, perhaps in history, it's killed millions of people, or at least hundreds of thousands of people, that it's ruining your life right now, that it's ruining the lives of millions of men and women right now. These misconceptions that exactly what was inculcated into you and thought to be virtue, you now have to regard as vice. Huge, fundamental, profound change. Okay, I was taught to worship university education. That to become a person with a PhD, to become a person, with the highest levels of accomplishment, not just a PhD, peer-reviewed articles, to be someone who submits to the rigors of that system and adds to, the sum total of human knowledge, to be the person who reaches out into the darkness of ignorance and drags something into light through that process of research, peer review, publication, and to aspire to be a better person by studying for and writing exams, essays. How did I overcome this sick and twisted and utterly immoral religion? This religion that's based on a bunch of lies just as much as Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, or some crazy cult. Okay, it had to come about through honesty. Honesty of a kind that's just as hard as Melissa being honest about her sex life or me being honest about my sex life. There's a whole series of confrontations where you stop and look at the reality of university education and realize the extent to which you've been brainwashed in the same way that so many of us were brainwashed by our grandparents. That you have been brainwashed by a bunch of ghost stories. And the time has come now to cast out the ghosts, to stop believing in these superstitious things, and to start living today as an author, as an intellectual unto yourself, as someone who creates and destroys meanings. Someone who's not the passive victim of thousands of years of evolution. Someone who's not the passive victim of thousands of years of cultural accretion, whether you think of that as the accumulated culture that produces a religion, a political tradition, or otherwise.